Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're going to go ahead and get started. I hope you've had a moment to get some refreshments, have a little conversation. Thank you so much for coming. We're really excited to bring everybody together around this topic. As you all know, it's critically important always and more so recently. So we have invited Dr. Andy Tompkins, who's an associate professor in the Department of Psychiatry, to give a welcome and kind of a charge for our event. Dr. Tompkins is the director of the Division of Substance Abuse and Addiction Medicine, which consists of a number of programs located at the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital and Trauma Center. So I would like to introduce Dr. Tompkins.
So I was just asked to do this 2 days ago. So I'm going to try and make it either funny. I want people to get a little bit angry because of the epidemic that's going on, and most importantly, that we get to know each other, that we can design innovative projects. This is the opioid overdose epidemic, and substance use disorders in general is our generation's epidemic. Now, as I was growing up as a small kid in Kansas, my mom actually took me out of school because there was this virus going around that we didn't really know what it was called, what it was about, but she was afraid that I could get it by just going to a school. And so later on, I grew up, and that fear drove a lot of people to do a lot of things. It drove a lot of people to get mad. It drove a lot of people to ask Congress to give more money, to ask for researchers to do a lot of things, which eventually resulted in HIV/AIDS being a chronic illness in some parts of the world, including the United States. And a lot of that original research happened at UCSF. I just moved here from Baltimore at Johns Hopkins, where I was for almost 13 years, and there I fell in love with addiction. Those are the patients that, I'm a psychiatrist by training, that a lot of my colleagues didn't really know what to do with, didn't think we had adequate treatments for, knew they were really, really problematic and made them upset and frustrated because they never did what we asked them to do. But for whatever reason, I think, given sort of my background and my patience level for the patients, we got along well. And, I learned that addiction is a chronic illness, that it's based in the brain, that we actually know a lot of things about what causes addiction in terms of risk factors of genetics. We also know that there's a lot of policies that the government can do or not do that can push addiction forward or not. So I learned a lot of things. I did my postdoctoral training at the Behavioral Pharmacology Research Unit, so a lot of my research has been in sort of understanding how humans act or interact on drugs under the influence of opioids and cocaine, but under the influence of a lot of other things. I also have done a lot of clinical trials looking for specifically treatments of stimulant use disorders, which we don't yet have a good pharmacological treatment for, but we have a lot of behavioral measures. And so one of the things that has always confused me is in the middle of this epidemic, with politicians saying we need to act, with our president saying this is an epidemic of a public health emergency, why we still don't allow contingency management to be covered by insurance, to allow us to have the one behavioral treatment that we know works the best for stimulant use disorder covered, and why doesn't every single clinic in the country offer it as one of its treatment armamentariums? I don't have a good answer for that, but that is one of the things that makes me mad. The other thing that makes me mad is that in the midst of this epidemic where 64,000 people die of this every year, more than the HIV/AIDS epidemic, we have treatments. The HIV/AIDS epidemic started when they did not know what the illness was. They didn't know what caused it. They didn't know how to treat it. And yet here we are in 2018 with opiate use disorder, an opiate epidemic. We know what causes it, opiate use disorder typically, although people can overdose using other substances. We also have good treatments that have been around since the 1970s. Again, the methadone maintenance projects, actually one of the first sites to do it was here in San Francisco. One of the first sites to offer buprenorphine induction clinics to allow buprenorphine to make a lot of people who didn't qualify for methadone or because we don't have enough methadone slots also get treatment. The first induction clinic was here in San Francisco. So we have a lot of treatments. We've also been giving out now naloxone to prevent overdoses in the city. And the city's Department of Public Health has really rallied around this illness. But that's just San Francisco. The rest of the country doesn't have all those options. In fact, some states don't even have all three options of FDA-approved medications for opiate use disorder. Why is that? Why is it that we have life-saving treatment that aren't available to patients? And the other question is, why aren't patients asking for it? You know, there's a lot of stigma around this illness, and so people do this, develop addiction in silence. They die in silence, and their families suffer in silence. You know, one of the things that it was very interesting for me in Baltimore was to go and talk about addiction to a grief counseling center, because more and more people were dying of opiate overdose, and the families didn't know how to grieve. And that's just this. I had to pause a moment, because this epidemic touches so many people in so many different ways. And the other thing that was shocking to me was that we were about to lose our accreditation for our medical examiner's office, because so many people were dying that they couldn't do the autopsies in time. And, you know, it still chokes me up. So we have a problem. We know we have solutions. But it's not just opioids, and it's not just going to be with us just today. This is our generation's problem, and we need to find great solutions. I'm excited that everyone's here together. I'm excited to bring this opportunity to talk to you and to encourage you to talk to each other, to think outside the box, and, you know, to spend some extra time doing your work, because this country needs us. So again, thank you. I want to get to the rest of the talks, but I'm excited to hear what everyone has to say.
Thank you. So we're going to begin our afternoon with some lightning talks. We have 5 quick 5-minute lightning talks, and hopefully those talks will get your brains engaged, get you thinking about some potential projects and collaborations, and we'll work on talking about that in the discussion sections. So we'll begin our talks with Dr. Margot Kushel.
Hi, thanks for coming. It's great to see everyone here. I'm Margot Kushel. I'm a general internist. I'm a buprenorphine provider, and I spend most of my time thinking about homelessness, where there are obvious overlaps between substance use and substance use disorders. Oops, I'm going backwards here, sorry. Am I going backwards? Should I click here? Yeah, there's something, it's on its own schedule here, so I guess.
Okay, sorry about that.
Let's see if I can do like this.
Sorry.
No, that's my bad. I said it. Let's see.
I can start
and then
talking, sure. And so I have done work in all sorts of homelessness. There's an obvious overlap between homelessness and substance use. Recently, I've been doing a lot of work on older homeless adults who make up, homeless adults 50 and older, who make up half of the single adult homeless population. So when we think about homelessness, we think about homeless youth or unaccompanied youth 12 to 25, homeless families, usually moms with kids, and then single adults, whether they're married or not. We think about half of people who are experiencing homelessness as single adults are 50 and over. And what we have found is that they have extremely early onset of what we call geriatric conditions. So they may be in their 50s and 60s, but they seem more like they're in their 70s and 80s. They have a prevalence of substance use disorders that is lower than that of younger homeless adults, but extremely much higher than age-adjusted, so much, much higher than non-homeless adults in their 50s and 60s, and overwhelmingly higher than homeless adults than adults in their 70s and 80s, who in some ways are most like it. So our cohort is called the Hope Home cohort. We've been interviewing people now since 2013. Every 6 months, we have follow-up rates that sort of rival the Physician's Health Study. 350 people, homeless, 50 and older. And every 6 months, we ask them a lot of questions about substance use. So we ask them the assist for a variety of drugs, the audit for alcohol, as well as questions from the California Tobacco Survey about tobacco. We ask them questions modified from the Addiction Severity Index. We ask them about their access to substance use treatment, their use of treatments of all kinds of different treatments. And then we have just extensive data collection. So we know about their health, their mental health, their function. We do cognitive impairment measures, so we do some measures of cognition, we do measures of mobility, health service utilization, housing, incarceration, and we have extensive life course history from the baseline interview. So we know a lot about their early childhoods and their early adulthoods. We know about their onset of substance use, their onset of mental health problems, etc., as well as their treatment history throughout their lives. So then I was asked to sort of say, what are the things that we need to do now? I think in terms of homelessness and addiction, there's a lot of work left to be done in understanding the causality. We know that homelessness is associated with addiction, but what we suspect is that while having a substance use disorder increases your risk of becoming homeless, being homeless worsens substance use disorders and makes it much harder to control them. And so there's actually a lot of reverse causality. We really need to spur implementation of known effective treatments. Just like you said, I think there are a lot of things that we know to do and we're just not doing them, and then there are the things that we actually don't know. And so there are a lot of things that have shown in small studies to work, things like wet houses for people with chronic alcohol use disorders. In Canada there's several, in the States there's one in Seattle and a few other cities where you actually give people alcohol. It is very uncomfortable for a lot of people, but it turns out it looks like it reduces overall alcohol use and reduces the harm from it. We've not been able to implement that widely in the U.S. There's a lot of great work being done in San Francisco of buprenorphine inductions on the street in encampments, but that's still in its early stages, and there's a lot to be known from that. I think we need to start implementing those things and examining their effectiveness. And then one of my interests is thinking of substance use treatment, how we rethink substance use treatment in older adults, many of whom have cognitive impairment. A lot of the cognitive-based treatments don't work very well with people who have cognitive problems, and a lot have functional impairments and are actually not allowed into the routine substance use treatment world because they can't physically do the work. And then there are a lot of drug-drug interactions for the medication-assisted treatment. In terms of teaming up for solutions, we have more data than we can analyze. So if there are people interested in substance use in homeless adults and are interested in just starting to get their feet wet, particularly trainees, please come and let me know. We've got plenty of it. I think there are treatment areas in need of innovation, particularly methamphetamine and other stimulant treatment strategies. I think questions of how contingency management works in populations who are living in deep poverty is a really interesting question that I think there's a lot more work that can be done. And then clearly we need more medication-assisted or some medication-assisted treatment for stimulants. As I talked about, harm reduction strategies for people with severe chronic alcohol use disorders who are not being well served by current systems, and then adaptation of strategies for older adults with cognitive and functional impairment. And then finally, from a policy perspective, we really need to motivate the political will for things that we know work. We are letting people die of opiate addictions, and we know how to treat it, and yet we're not giving them the treatment. I can't imagine as an internist discharging someone who comes into the hospital with diabetic ketoacidosis with no prescription for insulin, but we do that all the time for people who come in with opioid use disorders, and particularly for people experiencing homelessness. And then finally, better coordination of mental health and substance use treatment providers. I look forward for the day where my colleagues in mental health don't tell me, I can't treat this person's mental health problem until you cure their addiction. I think the day for that is over, and we need to move beyond that. So I think with that, I will stop.
Thank you. Next we have Dr. David Pennington. Music pointer if you need it.
All right, well, just want to say thank you for inviting me to this talk. I'm actually a junior investigator at the San Francisco Veteran Affairs Healthcare System and assistant professor at UCSF, and I just feel very welcome to be here with some distinguished speakers. So it's kind of a great opportunity for me to tell you a little bit about the work that I'm doing at the VA, using neuroscience, cognitive neuroscience, to inform some of the some treatments that we're looking to investigate. In terms of what my passion is, really what I want to do in my program of research is to promote cognitive enhancement amongst those suffering from addiction. The way that I'm currently doing that is through the conduct of a couple of randomized clinical trials. Right now we're investigating cognitive bias modification training, which is a paradigm used to try and treat somebody's automatic response to alcohol cues and hopefully reduce alcohol use and relapse. And my slides are a little off here, but one of the other RCTs that we're doing is working memory retraining task, where we're actually doing that in virtual reality space, and we're combining that with exercise to see if we could promote cognitive control and enhance neuroplastic change. Now, what we do in these studies, and actually in all of our work with our addiction research program at the VA, is we're using, or starting to use, functional and magnetic resonance imaging. We're using MR spectroscopy and diffusion tractography to try and measure pre and post change following these interventions. Also to see if we could see some of the neurobiological underpinnings of some of these interventions and how they might be used to help predict treatment responders. Out of the scanner, more on the behavioral science side, we're assessing for alcohol approach avoidance, which is the paradigm that we're trying to change and test. We also do a fair amount of neurocognitive assessment, looking to see if we can measure executive control primarily, and then other things like learning and memory, and see how those change pre and post treatment. We also do a fair amount of psychiatric evaluation, particularly for disorders that affect veterans, and so we're always looking to see how, namely PTSD and traumatic brain injury, influence alcohol use disorder. And also, we're in the early stages of setting up an alcohol self-administration task, not so much to look at pre and post change for interventions, but to see if we could develop some new targets for intervention and see if we could see something sort of on the experimental side, and hopefully develop those into other interventions. In terms of developing new treatment targets, this is just sort of a really simple model of sort of top-down and bottom-up processing of addiction. So, from the bottom-up processing, we could see that alcohol cues could affect perception, memory associations, and incentive salience. From the top-down perspective, where we could potential targets that we could look at developing interventions are for executive control and for life goals. And so already a lot of work has been done in this for perception. A lot of work has been done on doing attentional bias retraining. In terms of memory associations, people are working on selective inhibition retraining. In terms of selective salience or incentive salience, we are actually doing work on approach bias retraining. And from the other direction, in order to help executive control, we're doing work in memory retraining. And then for life goals, people could implement motivational interviewing or motivational enhancement type techniques. Now, as I said before, the areas that we're working in right now is in work in memory retraining and approach bias retraining, but there's a lot of other potential avenues for interventions and for development. In terms of opportunities for collaborations with others, from the cognitive neuroscience perspective, we're interested in partnering with people who have expertise in EEG. We're also interested in people who understand and have experience in user-user collaborative filtering systems. The reason that I bring this up is because there's a lot of controversy on some of these paradigms as interventions being able to help people reduce, say, approach bias modification or approach bias for alcohol. And so one of the reasons why I think this is the case is because there is actually a lot of variance within our patients who come into our clinics, and approach bias modification relies heavily on using alcohol images. And one of the things that I think is affecting this is that it's not personalized enough, that we actually need to figure out which images are most salient for each individual and personalize a treatment for them. User-user collaborative filtering systems is basically what Netflix uses to determine what movies to recommend to you based on your previous movies that you've watched. We think that we might be able to validate a set of images and develop this system in order to personalize a set of images for our paradigm. And we're looking to partner with people who may already know how to do this. In terms of the behavioral science, we want to learn more from animal models. We want to be able to see if there's some sort of paradigms that we might bring into the human lab and study and see if we might be able to then develop those into other types of interventions. We're also looking for people who have experience already working in attentional bias retraining and go-no-go paradigms. And also we'd like to integrate biometrics into our program of research. So we're interested in doing more eye tracking and facial analysis evaluation. And in terms of the clinical science, we want to combine some of our cognitive interventions. So the approach bias modification, we'd like to combine it with motivational interviewing or motivational enhancement techniques, perhaps mindfulness and some attention retraining, and also combine it with various pharmacotherapies that might complement some of these areas that are known deficit in addiction. We also want to extend this to other substance use disorder populations. Basically, what we focus on now is alcohol use disorder with and without other psychiatric comorbidities, but not other substance use disorders. So with that, I just tried to speed through that in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pennington. Next we have Joe Guydish.
Paige, when she spoke to me about this event today, said we're inviting champions, to come and talk about their research. And I'm not a champion of anything. I think if I'm a champion of anything, I'm just a champion by virtue of surviving at UCSF for a long time. That's about it. I also think that if I had known the title of what other people were talking about, I would have changed my title, because my title is not so much about interactions of treatment. It's about interactions of interactions. I have only one slide. This is my only one slide. It's a detailed slide, but it's the only one. So you needn't be too intimidated by my talk. My idea is a very simple idea, and I'll try to articulate it, that we have these groups of addiction researchers and treatment and training across the university, starting at Parnassus, down at the General, you're at the VA, you just heard Dr. Pennington, at Mission Bay, and we have at the Wheeler Institute, which of course I know nothing about. I'm interested to hear and learn more about it, but I know nothing about it. And I have wondered if anybody before today has taken the trouble to try to look across these silos and to think about how to integrate or gain synergy or benefit somehow from drawing us together. Today is a one-time event, so that's really wonderful. We have one time to sit and chat about these things. But I can envision, and I don't know if you can envision, a coordinated or maybe a loose confederation of a research center which is bigger than any of us, in which we have some sort of some sort of unified leadership is one thing, some sort of shared resources, some sort of ongoing way of hearing about our research and what other people are doing, and learning about the connections. And why don't we act a little bit more like a cancer center, for example? So our cancer center thinks about preclinical research, going into clinical research, and then going into treatment. I know in addiction that's something we rarely think about, honestly never, but we almost never can think that far and put things that much together. But in cancer and the NCI we do, and it's expected, And so my appeal today is really to try to find a way, whether there is a way that this could be done, how could it be done, what would be required to have an interaction of interactions, to have synergy across our silos and some interaction between our silos, which would lead to mutual benefit in terms of our work, our campus, our university, and the people whom we serve, even in our community. And that's really what I have to say.
Your slides didn't get saved in our master deck, so now I'm getting them.
You want to?
these on through the guide as well. So. So if I can make a comment to Joe's comments while we're waiting. So I will say that within the team science program that's sponsoring this event, we do have some limited resources, albeit limited, but that could help in sort of the next steps, you know, the sort of maybe setting up some follow-on meetings for people. So as you'll get a survey about the event, and if that sort of thing is of interest to you, let us know, and we'll figure it out all the way from, you know, just a simple getting a listserv together so that, you know, you can kind of gather people again, but also, you know, maybe thinking about some sort of a seminar series or something to have on a regular basis to at least get things started. We have many initiatives like that. The Environmental Health Initiative on campus kind of started that way, and I'll say the Population Health initiative that's been recently launched out of school medicine. It could also be a place to help foster some follow-on activity around addiction. So the computer's restarting because I stepped on the cord here, so be careful. It unplugged when I stepped on this thing. So hopefully, it looks like it's about to be there. Great. Here we go. They spent thousands of dollars re-envisioning this room, but didn't change anything about the electronics. Okay. Where's my presenter view there? There we go. Great. So the screen is working. So Dr. Hopf, I have your slides on this screen, if you would be comfortable talking without them on the projector, because we're not getting any response to telling me to turn on the projector. We saw it for a second? Okay.
Yeah, flash slide.
Oh, how bizarre. Okay, here we go. Let's try it. Hey. Thank you.
Oops, that's right. Did you disconnect the computer once
Yes.
again? All right, well, thanks for letting me be a part of here. So we're just going to change. Excuse me? Yeah. Let's see. Does this go forward and back? Okay. So I'm Woody Hopf. I'm in the Department of Neurology, part of what used to be called the Gallo Center. We're now the ARG, this Alcohol Addiction Research Group, although we're looking for a new name. And I like to put up this tile. It's a little bit flippant, but it's really what I'm most interested in is to understand why do humans make bad decisions and where does that come from? And so I've been studying this mechanisms of compulsive alcohol drinking, which I'll tell you, define more in just a moment, as sort of a special case, a tractable case to try to understand how can we know that there's something bad and yet we choose to act anyway. So we know that binge drinking in alcoholics produces many different harms in people. But there's a lot of interest in this, what has been called compulsive drinking, which is basically intake that persists even though you know you have bad negative consequences, this loss of job or family or freedom. For example, this person here who after a stint of drunk driving decided he'd rather finish his beer even though there's a cop pointing a gun at him. And this behavioral state has become the core of the DSM-5 criterion. It's a behavioral disorder of continuing to drink even though that you know bad things are occurring. And one of the reasons why we focus on it, of course, is that there are many people who are content and happy to be addicts, and there's really nothing that we can do to help them. Well, there are things, billboards and such like that, but what I'm particularly interested in are helping people who are treatment seekers, and especially at that moment of crisis. They know they're at risk for relapsing. What can we do to help them? I think that would be of tremendous value. And so our work across the years in rodents has identified now a common brain circuit for compulsion like drinking. It involves projections from the medial prefrontal cortex and the anterior insula into the nucleus accumbens, among other brain areas and various receptor signaling systems, NMDA, orexin, alpha-1 adrenergics. And one of the things that's been useful for us is that this circuit is important with different kinds of negative consequences. What that leads us to interpret is that this is not a circuit that cares about what the negative consequence is. Its job is to make sure that you keep drinking. And one of the things that's interesting for us, in fact inspired us to go after it, is this is the same set of brain areas where if you play an alcohol cue, you get a certain level of activation that predicts problem drinking out in the real world. So it's a very nice convergence between the animal and the human work. So as we're trying to understand what these different brain areas may specifically contribute to this decision to drink in the face of bad consequences, a lot of what I'm thinking about now is this larger question of how do we overcome obstacles in order to do certain kinds of actions. And so this is sort of meant to be a broader picture to try to bring what we're trying to address in rats out into humans. And what I hope to do is to get input from people who actually work with addicts to try to give us a way to focus our experiments and our models. So basically, when you think about there's an obstacle, but you want the reward, there are different ways that you could do this. One of them is you could simply focus on the goal. This is a process where you override the obstacles. Yes, you are aware of the bad consequences, their emotional impacts on you, but ultimately you get the reward and you're very efficient about it. But you could imagine that as the punishment gets stronger and stronger, that this becomes a very difficult strategy to implement. Then, of course, on the far side, you can simply be insensitive to negativity. There's certainly evidence from addicts that this is the case. It's like the duck with the water. It doesn't matter. And what we're particularly interested in is this central domain, where we think of it as a process where you avert your eyes or you ignore, sort of the simplified version of denial. And what we want to be able to understand is, how does the brain allow you to avert your eyes? What is the cognitive mechanisms and the neural mechanisms? So you can imagine that this is an adaptive process. Under some conditions, you're starving, you only have rotten food to eat, you avert your eyes and your mental attention so that you can eat it and you don't get overcome by the disgust. And part of why we're interested in this comes from some of our recent findings. We see something in a number of different behavioral measures, and what I'm showing you is just a very simple one, which is here we're asking how much did an animal drink in a session, how much did it lick, and you can see in the blue dots this is regular drinking, plain old alcohol, nothing fancy about it. And in the red dots, this is now you're getting punished when you're drinking, what we call this compulsive drinking. And what you can see in this example is responding is significantly less variable. So we think about it, are they more automatic? Are they more focused? In our moments of greatest delusion, we call this the head down and push model, where the idea is that, yes, you may have an idea of what you want to do. You're not necessarily as efficient as you could be because you're not monitoring your actions, but at least you get enough of the drinking without having to be aware. It's a bit akin to this idea of intake defense. And so as we try to understand what's happening, what are the neural and the psychological mechanisms, this has left us with some really central and critical questions. And part of why I'm here and asking you guys for your help is to know how much of these type processes do we think are actually important in addicts. There are certainly different kinds of addicts. One of the central questions is why is this ignoring necessary at all? Why is it not sufficient to just be able to focus on the goal and override it? There must be some reason that we have this heuristic shortcut that people often utilize. And that's a very big question. There's a lot to unpack within it, but it's that general question. It's more of a conceptual, even a theoretical question, but it really comes down to, under different kinds of situations, you can use different modes. Is this the kind of mode, this one in the center here, the one that addicts really use? And then another thing that we're very interested, you can imagine that there are brain areas that encode adversity. One of the things that's very important when you're coming up to a condition where there is some sense of a negative challenge, do you have to decrease the brain encoding of that adversity? Maybe that's essential for allowing someone to act in a compulsive way. So we want to know, can we find the brain areas where those adverse signals might be that then get suppressed when you're trying to act compulsively, and can we definitively show that it's necessary for addiction? And then finally, it's sort of this, again, this larger question that relates to the human addicts is this denial or deliberate ignoring really important for human addiction? Are we kind of off base in the way that we model compulsion? So clearly addicts demonstrate all kinds of aspects of denial, but it's very possible that this is an epiphenomenon, that regardless of how they say and how they act, they could act perfectly normal and never exhibit denial and still be have the same level of addiction. So it's really a question to you guys, which is denial an epiphenomenon, or is it the heart of what makes addiction so hard to break? So I will leave it there.
Okay, now we have Dr. Steve Batki. Do you have a drive with your slides on?
Yeah. I also emailed them, but just plug that in. Sorry, I came late. One of the problems with clinical research is the word clinical. And sometimes one is caught up in the exigencies of the substrate in which we work, the clinical setting. That combined with, I had no idea where to park once I got here. So I guess, that captures some of the difficulties with addiction. There's both problems with top-down control as well as problems with increase in reward salience, and then problems with excessive negative stimuli which are looking for relief. What we're how do I access the, maybe I pulled up the wrong.
Did I pull the wrong one?
Yeah. Okay. Right. So basically, I screwed up in my. Okay, so let's just start there. Basically, what I was going to say in this 5-minute talk was we've got in addiction pharmacotherapy research, we have some substances for which we have pharmacologic treatments, and they include opioids, alcohol, and tobacco. But really for everything else, we don't have anything at all in terms of medications, and we rely on psychosocial treatments, which are effective to a degree, but have not been successful with most people in preventing relapse, return to alcohol and substance use. So cocaine, methamphetamine, hallucinogens, cannabis, solvents, inhalants, sedative hypnotics, we really don't have much
For opioids, alcohol, and tobacco, we have some pretty good treatments. All of them at the present time have limitations. And just in show of hands, how many here are engaged in research with human? Okay. And how many basic scientists working in non-human models? All right. And how many are involved with pharmacotherapy research? Okay. So the challenge is to find not only better treatments for the substances that we already have some well-known pharmacologic approaches to, but also to work, and work has been going on for probably about 30 years with cocaine use disorder. Began with antidepressants. In 1983, tried for cocaine use disorder, showing some early promise, and have, with cocaine and later, more recently with methamphetamine, pharmacotherapy research has found its way through antidepressants, anticonvulsants, antipsychotics, and numerous other molecules without really any success at all. In the work that we're focusing on at the San Francisco VA Medical Center, the pharmacotherapy research in terms of alcohol use disorder has been focusing on co-occurring disorders populations. And there's some real value in addition to treating straight-ahead addiction that's not complicated by co-occurring disorders, there's a real value in focusing on the treatment of patients who have serious co-occurring mental illness. Because each of the major domains of mental illness in their own ways exaggerate the vulnerabilities that we see in straight-ahead addiction. So, for example, in schizophrenia that co-occurs with alcohol and substance use, we see not just the ordinary vulnerabilities to alcohol use, perhaps conferred by genetic vulnerability and environmental stressors, but also the added lack of adequate top-down control due to cognitive processing difficulties, and also added sources of aversive emotional states, the social anxiety that people with schizophrenia experience when they're engaged in human interaction and they can't accurately read body language, facial expressions, or tone of voice. It's not an accident that people with schizophrenia have 3 to 4 times the rates of alcohol, cannabis use disorders, and probably 4 to 5 times the rates of tobacco use disorder, although due to different problems, probably those involving cognitive processes and nicotinic receptors. With PTSD, which is a large focus of the work that Dave Pennington and I are doing at the VA, similarly, in addition to the regular vulnerabilities to addiction, there are much higher aversive emotional states, more intense states, and also, again, problems with cognitive processing and top-down control, although of a different nature than what one sees with schizophrenia. Another co-occurring population that we're doing work with alcohol use disorder is our veterans with traumatic brain injury, who again share with individuals with PTSD and those with schizophrenia problems with cognitive control. The anxiety and mood-related problems are of a different nature than what one sees in PTSD and schizophrenia. And we could really go through all of the other major psychiatric disorders and identify co-occurrences that are synergistic in terms of creating vulnerability in major depression, bipolar disorder, and so on. What this really leads us to do is to look at not just drugs, medications that seek to reduce the incentive salience of substances like alcohol and opioids, but medications that might strengthen cognitive functioning and improve executive control. And I know a number of us here, Andy Kaiser and others, have been very actively looking at that. recent analyses that we've done in our lab, and Dave Pennington has been really helpful for this, have shown, for example, that the well-known relationship between PTSD symptom severity and increases in substance use, such as alcohol use, may be significantly moderated by the level of executive functioning cognitive control, which moderates the influence of PTSD symptom severity in how much it drives increases in drinking. So we're looking at a number of different molecules. Interestingly, Woody and Dorit, Ron here have provided a couple of the molecules that we're interested in our lab right now, orexin antagonists and also the atypical anticonvulsant lacosamide. And just those two molecules illustrate different possible mechanisms that offer avenues for pharmacotherapy, with orexins helping perhaps to reduce the activation that's incited by cues to which we are reactive, as well as possibly reducing incentive salience. Lacosamide, an anticonvulsant that in Dorit's lab has been shown to possibly interfere with habit-related memories that are triggered by cues, and again, possibly reduce the drive that's produced by cues, and perhaps improve the ability of top-down control. In terms of this team science event, I think there are very important partnerships and liaisons that I would like to see built between straight-ahead clinical pharmacotherapy research and, for example, cognitive neuroscience work such as Dave Pennington and I think Andy Kaiser and others of you are doing to help us look for better ways to measure the kinds of improvements in cognitive functioning that we want to see in addiction pharmacotherapy research. So we've really moved beyond simply looking for ways to reduce craving, to reduce the hedonic value of drugs, but also more and more to attempting to strengthen inhibitory control. Similarly, I think in clinical pharmacotherapy research, we want to take advantage of the work done in animal labs to partner with those of you who are involved in imaging and in computational neuroscience to hopefully let us get on a clearer path to coming up with, first of all, better treatments for the drugs for which we already have some approaches, and also to try to solve the really thorny problems of breaking the cycle of stimulant use disorder and the other drug problems for which we don't have answers to. Thank you.